Imagine a country where ancient traditions intertwine with cutting-edge technology, where millennia-old temples stand alongside neon-lit skyscrapers. Now, imagine that for over 2 centuries, this very country shut its doors to the world, forbidding foreigners from entering and its own citizens from leaving. No traveler could set foot on its land without permission. No Western ideas crossed its gates. No ship dared to challenge the order imposed by the government. But why? What led an entire nation to isolate itself from the rest of humanity? Was it fear or strategy? The Japan we know today, a global leader in innovation and culture, was once an unreachable mystery, an enigma hidden behind invisible walls. And perhaps the secret of its modern success lies precisely in this past of seclusion. But to understand how all of this happened, we need to go back thousands of years, to the origins of a people who emerged among mountains, volcanoes, and stormy seas. Long before the samurai and emperors, Japan was a wild land, inhabited by nomadic peoples who had crossed the sea from continental Asia. Around 40,000 years ago, small groups of hunter-gatherers settled on the islands, living off fishing, hunting, and foraging. Over the millennia, humanity shaped this land of volcanoes and dense forests. The first signs of civilization emerged with the Jomon culture, a people who created some of the world's oldest pottery. But it was the Yayoi, arriving from Korea and China around 300 BC, who brought something revolutionary: agriculture and metallurgy. With the domestication of rice and the creation of iron and bronze tools, small villages began transforming into organized communities. The fertile lands of the south allowed cultivation, and with it came the need for leadership. Disputes over territory and resources became common, and little by little, the first kingdoms began to emerge. Among these communities, one kingdom would stand out from the rest. In the 3rd century AD, the Yamato region began expanding, subjugating rival tribes and establishing a centralized government. Its leader, believed to be a direct descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu, was not just a ruler but a divine figure. Thus, Japan's imperial lineage was born, a dynasty that, according to tradition, would never be interrupted. However, despite the growing power of the emperors, Japan was still a fragmented land, a mosaic of cultures and beliefs in need of a unifying thread. But this answer would not come from within, it would come from beyond. When Japan had its first major contact with a far more advanced civilization, the destiny of the nation changed forever. As Japan expanded and consolidated its rule under the imperial lineage, across the sea, a cultural and political force dominated East Asia, China. Centuries ahead in organization, technology, and philosophy, the Chinese Empire was a colossus radiating its influence to neighboring kingdoms. And Japan, still young and fragmented, watched closely. Trade and diplomacy with the Chinese and Koreans brought innovations that would forever alter Japanese society. But none were as impactful as the arrival of Buddhism. In the year 552, monks from the Kingdom of Beech, in present-day Korea, landed in Japan, bringing golden Buddha statues, sacred sutras, and a new perspective on life and death. For some, it was a revelation. For others, a threat. The ancient Shinto faith, Japan's native religion that venerated spirits of nature and ancestors, now faced a powerful competitor. But Buddhism did not just survive, it thrived. In the 7th century, Prince Shotoku, one of Japan's most influential rulers, embraced the new faith and initiated a series of reforms inspired by the Chinese model. In 645, the Taika reforms transformed Japan into a centralized state, with an efficient bureaucracy and a tax system based on agriculture, similar to China's Tang dynasty. Soon, Kyoto was established as the Grand Imperial Capital in 794, marking the beginning of the refined Heian period. The court became the epicenter of culture, with nobles dedicated to poetry, calligraphy, and the arts. But while emperors and aristocrats lived in a world of luxury and sophisticated rituals, a new force was growing in the shadows. Warriors trained for battle, loyal to their lords, and ruthless against their enemies. Soon, they would take control of Japan, and nothing would ever be the same again. For centuries, the imperial court in Kyoto flourished in a world of refined poetry, elaborate ceremonies, and silent political intrigue. But outside the golden walls of the capital, reality was far different. The centralized power the Taika reforms sought to establish was beginning to wane. Aristocratic nobles controlled vast lands, but the protection of these properties fell to their private warriors. Men trained in the art of war and loyal to their lords. These warriors were the first samurai. With the growing weakness of the imperial government, the daimyos, regional feudal lords, became the true authorities in their lands. And where there is power, there is conflict. Clans began fighting for influence and dominance, and Japan's fate would soon be decided not by court scholars, but by the sharp blades of the samurai. The rivalry between the powerful Taira and Minamoto clans plunged Japan into a brutal conflict. The Genpei War, 1180 to 1185. The war ended with the Minamoto clan's victory and the rise of Minamoto no Yoritomo as the most powerful figure in the country. But instead of ruling as an emperor, Yoritomo took on an unprecedented title, shogun. In 1192, he established Japan's first shogunate, a military government that, in practice, reduced the emperor to a mere symbolic figure. For the first time, the nation was under the rule of warriors, and the samurai era had begun. But while Japan strengthened internally, a massive shadow loomed on the horizon. In the heart of Asia, an unstoppable empire was about to shake the world. And Japan, despite its new military structure, would not go unnoticed. By the late 13th century, Japan was no longer a fragmented land. Under the rule of the Kamakura shogunate, the samurai dominated the country, imposing a rigid military government. But as Japanese warriors solidified their power, a colossal enemy was rising in the heart of Asia. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, had expanded the Mongol Empire to an unprecedented size. China, Korea, Persia, nothing seemed capable of stopping his advance. And then he set his sights on Japan. In 1265, the Great Khan sent envoys demanding the archipelago's submission. Japan ignored them. Kublai Khan did not repeat requests, he sent armies. In 1274, a fleet of over 900 ships and 30,000 Mongol, Chinese, and Korean warriors landed on the island of Kyushu. Japan, inferior in numbers and technology, seemed doomed. But then, something happened that no one could have predicted. A devastating storm swept the Japanese coast, destroying much of the invading fleet and forcing the survivors to retreat. Japan had been saved by the very sky itself. But Kublai Khan would not accept defeat so easily. In 1281, he sent an even larger force, around 4,400 ships and over 140,000 men, one of the largest invasion fleets in history. For weeks, desperate samurai resisted in fierce battles. Then, once again, the winds blew in their favor. A colossal typhoon, what the Japanese would call kamikaze, the divine wind, shattered the Mongol fleet, sinking thousands of ships and forcing the survivors to flee or perish on the shores. Japan had defied the greatest empire on earth, and won. But victory came at a cost. The defense against the Mongols drained the shogunate's treasury, weakening its power and sowing disorder. Soon, the country would plunge into a new era of instability, where samurai clans would fight an endless war. For over 2 centuries, Japan lived under the iron rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, isolated from the world, protected by its own traditions and unbreakable laws. But time waits for no one. In 1853, the inevitable happened. Commodore Matthew Perry's black ships appeared on the horizon, bringing not only cannons and forced treaties but an impossible choice to ignore. Would Japan yield to foreign pressure, or would it find a way to resist and reinvent itself? The Sakoku policy, which had kept the archipelago safe for so long, had now become its greatest weakness. The storm was about to fall, and Japan would have to choose between remaining in the past or taking a bold leap into the future. For over 2 centuries, Japan lived in a delicate balance. The Tokugawa shogunate brought order to a country devastated by civil wars, consolidating an era of peace and internal growth. Cities flourished, culture reached new heights of sophistication, and the samurai became the ultimate symbol of the Japanese spirit. However, this stability came at a cost: absolute isolation. While the world industrialized and Western powers expanded their domains, Japan remained trapped in an increasingly distant past. It was an impenetrable fortress, but one whose foundations had begun to crack. The arrival of Matthew Perry's black ships in 1853 delivered the final blow to this closed system. For the first time in over 200 years, Japan was forced to face the outside world not as a distant threat but as an inescapable reality. The treaties imposed by Western powers were humiliating, undermining the shogunate's sovereignty and spreading discontent among the daimyos and samurai. Internal and external pressures reached a breaking point, and the Tokugawa government itself could not contain the growing turmoil. Amidst this crisis, a new movement emerged, a call to restore imperial power and modernize the country before it was too late. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration marked the end of the Tokugawa shogunate and the return of the emperor to the center of government. But this was no longer a ceremonial monarch bound by the traditions of the past. He became the symbol of an unprecedented revolution. Japan abandoned feudalism, adopted rapid industrialization, and restructured its military, political, and economic systems. What was once an isolated country now launched itself into the world with a new purpose: to become a modern power. Within just a few decades, Japan not only equaled Western nations but began to challenge them, proving that its ancient culture and new technology could coexist. Thus, Japan demonstrated that its strength did not come solely from its swords or walls but from its ability to adapt. The nation that once closed itself off from the world for protection now opened up to dominate it. The Bushido of the samurai did not disappear. It merely transformed, guiding a country that would continue to astonish the world. The era of isolation had ended, but Japan's true battle had only just begun. If you enjoyed this epic journey through Japan's history and want to see more content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This helps us bring even more incredible sagas to you. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos and share this with a friend who loves history. The legend of Japan doesn't end here, and you won't want to miss what comes next.